This is Nojus Setkauskas, and you're listening to NARA podcast. Today we have a new episode in English. It's produced by our fellow Nojus Setkauskas, a new voice of the podcast. I do hope you will enjoy his company. Noyo, take it away.
I think that's also easy to forget when you're born in Norway or the Netherlands or France, that at some point in your nation's history there were some conditions that allowed your society to evolve and progress into what it is today that you love and you want to protect. And you have to also be humble in a way and accept that other nations deserve the same. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you appreciate NATO because you take it a bit for granted, but other people rely on it.
You just heard the voice of Tommy Gulliksen, the Norwegian journalist and film director of a new documentary called Facing War. I met him during the human rights film festival called Movies That Matter, which took place in March in The Hague. His latest film, Facing War, follows Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, as he is navigating political pressure and diplomacy to finish the war in Ukraine. With the unique access to the backstage of NATO, the daily meetings and long-distance travels, we witnessed Stoltenberg balancing demands from side characters such as Biden, Macron, Zelensky and Orban. Our conversation was recorded on the 26th of March. We discussed the fast-paced process of the film's production and talked about the complexity of NATO in 2025, when the geopolitical tensions keep on rising. Before we jump into the conversation, I invite you to listen to the part of the film's trailer. You will hear Jens Stoltenberg rehearsing his speech, which he will later make in Kiev on the 20th of April 2023.
The Ukrainian people will prevail. Is that softer than Ukraine will prevail?
Yes.
Great to see you. I'm so impressed. So I think at least we should say Ukraine will prevail.
I'm here today with a simple message. NATO stands with you today, tomorrow, and for as long as it takes.
The most striking part about the film is the access. Maybe you could elaborate more about the beginning of the film and how did you have to go to NATO to pitch the film to them? How was the whole process of getting that such exclusive access? So my producer, who I've worked with on several projects, but also with the Prime Minister, we worked with Stoltenberg before. And she knows him well because she used to be a political commentator. And she just told me when she saw his face when he was giving the press conference after on the invasion day. She just said, look at that face. He knows what's coming, and he's going to have one hell of a job. And we should position ourselves. So we did. We reached out, and of course they had more important things to tend to, but we didn't give up, and we just kept the dialogue going. And they also got a lot of other offers, or people from a lot of countries wanted that same access. And then we got in dialogue, and Stoltenberg said he wanted to do it with us, and then we had, of course, to get NATO on board, which was quite difficult to find something that they could feel secure. Nobody would lose their job or go to jail because they let an independent camera be present, but also the fact that we couldn't be tied down to, we are not working for NATO, we're not making any, can't be a promotion for NATO, and they cannot dictate, direction of the film. Yeah. So, but still they would have to have some safety measures, and we found the common ground was security. So, for example, there are sometimes they refer to sources, or you see someone in the background, or you see a telephone that is secret, or a surveillance camera, or things like that. But it was never down to taste or feelings, and that was really important. So we had a good contract, and then it moved really fast because they said we got the green light after a long time on a Thursday, and then on a Friday they invited us to go to South Korea and Japan with them, and they said you have to come now.
Okay, so it was a very quick start.
Yeah, and then we had no funding, we had nothing, then so I have to use my personal credit card and to buy the plane tickets. I had to do that for a long time because
that when the train left the station, it was moving really fast and it was never going to wait for anything. And more or less then I was just on the road with them for 2 years. And then I also had to figure everything out because they don't have any time to explain to you how they work, how everything, like with motorcades and how do you operate, where can you move and what is okay, what is not. You get no explanation. You just have to learn. And you have to learn in a very, very, very at a high pace. Because if you, for example, lose the motorcade, like when you have a president or a secretary general like Stoltenberg, he sits in the VIP car, and then you have the motorcade maybe consists of 7-8 different cars and some police cars and stuff like that. But if you want a shot of him getting into the car, you have to be outside the car, right? But once he is in the car, the motorcade starts rolling. So if you do that, then you will lose the motorcade. If you lose the motorcade, you can, best case scenario is you reconnect with it maybe 2, 3, 4 hours later. Sometimes maybe you don't reconnect until you're at the hotel in the night. If you're really unlucky, you don't catch the private plane that goes from the airport, and you're stuck in another country. So the stakes are really high sometimes. If you're 1 minute late, or you just don't think of the consequences of being outside and getting the exterior shot. So
did you have to plan all of this very carefully in advance, how to get these shots, right?
And then you also have to, I think it's very important when you make documentaries that you adapt the idea to the reality. You cannot force the reality to adapt to your idea. So, for example, you have to choose a genre, you have to choose your filmatic language. So this is not in this film there are no tripod shots. I experienced that, after the first trip. I pretty much understood how we can make this film. But one of the dogmas was, dogmatic rules was that there will be no tripod shots, and there are very few exteriors because there are no time for exterior shots. So then we are not going to force in we're not going to buy stock shots and everything, because that will make the film
artificial.
Yeah. And not conceptual. So there are a few of that. It is supposed to feel tense and close, and
I mean that's how it feels.
Yeah.
That's how it feels, and it seems like it's still capturing in the camera. It still captures the most essential moments and essential conversations. Sometimes when maybe it shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
Did you film all of it?
Yeah, I had to. Normally I work with the DOP and I work with sound technicians sometimes. But in a way it was back to the old days in film school. I filmed a lot and I also studied photography. And normally I would prefer to work with a great DOP because they add something else and you have another mindset working. And I think that
it takes really off the pressure maybe from to capture everything. Then I think it can be quite overwhelming for just a one-man band to do everything and then focus also on the story, but also being in such a high-paced environment such as NATO Summit, or
Yeah, there's the practical thing. There's the practical thing why you can only be yourself is because there is not room for another person inside the car, in a helicopter or whatever. And then you have the security clearance, which is an issue. You cannot just bring anyone. And then the trust issues, of course. And also, if you are two, it's more difficult to hide 2 flies on the wall than one. And also for a director, I feel that the problem, if you're present in a room, and if you're a director, you have to place your eyes somewhere. If you're a photographer, you can always look at your viewfinder. It's a very effective way of disconnecting from reality, which is really good when you're just in the room with another person, because that person can ignore you much easier than if you're just standing there and watching them. So that I feel that very calming in a way, but that I can just pretend that I'm doing my job and I'm not going to relate to you at all. I'm just filming. And then, so for example, being present with Stoltenberg, that he could just relax. He doesn't have to talk to me. He doesn't have to socialize with me if he doesn't want to. And then you have other practical challenges. It's like, for example, with sound, you cannot put the lavalier mic transmitter on them because that would also take too long to take it on and off, because he goes into a lot of talks and meetings and phone calls that cannot be recorded. So you have to capture the sound in different ways, and I did that with, I had normally 3 to 4 different sources of sound. Like, for example, this Zoom recorder, I connect with a small microphone, I build it into a leather case, something that looks like it should be on the table in a meeting. I put it into paper cups, coffee cups, with just a microphone that you can just put it there, and then you have sound very close. We had a lot of inventions. The thing is that, of course, you have the practical post-production issues that you need to sync all of it and everything, but you also have the practical challenges that suddenly he just rises from a room and goes, because now we have to go now. And then you have all this equipment in that room, and you have to gather it really quickly, remember everything, and not lose them. Because if you are 20 meters behind a VIP like that, then you're outside the iron ring, and you can be stopped anywhere. And then you lose the motorcade, and then so on. So you have to be so focused and never slip up. You can never forget anything. Like I didn't forget any equipment during those 2 years, but it was always like present in my mind.
Maybe you could put into perspective the time frame.
Yeah.
When did you start shooting and when did you finish?
We started shooting the first shoot was in January 23 and the last was November 24.
Okay, so a year and a half.
Yeah, almost 2 years, 22 months.
Okay, and you mentioned that, especially in the documentary making, but in the documentary type as you're making, you need to be super adaptable.
Yeah.
But on a day, of course, but then also on a broader scale, as the film progresses. And I wanted to ask you, did the direction change of the film over the course of months? And also, did it change according to the geopolitical situation?
Yeah, I would say it takes a while. In every film I worked on, it takes a while to get to know your film. Because you have this idea of what you want to make. And I think as a filmmaker, you are challenged a lot from your producers, from the financiers, everyone. You really need to have a concept. You need to have this directional ambition and vision. So you pushed very hard. Part of that is good. Part of that is counterproductive because it forces you to decide what it is when you haven't got to know them yet. It's like you decide your child, what personality will my child have? You need to let it grow and it will talk to you. You cannot always tell your child
what to tell.
And that's why you can't always tell your film what it is. The film will at some point give you some direction. That was important for me also to stay open to that process. And I think in the beginning, it took me a lot of time and effort to learn how to deal and behave in my environment, to understand also just how it works, what are the rules, what are the unwritten rules, how do I operate, how do I become most invisible, how do I make sure that these really important scenes will happen in front of my camera, and also understanding the storyline, what is the story here. And I think for a long time I was a little too much focused on the war and how the war was unveiling. So you had, for example, in the spring 23, where we're the first 6 months we were filming, we felt that the counteroffensive, the Ukrainian counteroffensive, could be like the decisive moment of the war. We actually thought, a lot of people thought, that this is when they push back and they may push the Russians out of the territory and we might get an ending to this war. That would have, of course, been very important to the film, but that's not what happened. The opposite happened. So that became something we kept in the film for a very long time, but the story wasn't really about that. But that became too depictive of actually what's happening at the front. But if you look at the film again, you will see that we do not have any material from Ukraine that is not shot through the eyes of Stoltenberg. So that is not our privilege to be at the front, because Stoltenberg is not at the front. It's not our privilege to be with the victims, or because Stoltenberg is not there. So to me, that's a cheap tool to go there. But we are not portraying the terrible scenes at the front, or for the people who have lost their dear ones or are living in deep fear. We are portraying what happens in the corridors of power. So that is our universe. We will stick to it. We will never escape.
That's why there's so many interiors. This kind of restricts your location, that it doesn't go beyond interiors.
Yeah.
That's really great. film is more about, what's happening behind the scenes. It's almost like, I think for audience, it's always so interesting what's happening in the backstage of a theater or like in the back kitchen of the restaurant. So it's in a way, that's the story. What was your takeaway from the back of house of NATO?
I think one of the first things that struck me, and I hope also for people who watch the film, is that like you see Stoltenberg and you see his advisors, and it's not a very militaristic kind of people. It's not people who love tanks and guns and ammunition, and they're not generals. They are political beings. And they are quite, a lot of them very liberal, very progressive, and some of them being open that, his deputy chief of staff, Lawrence, who is still the deputy chief of staff for Rutte, he told me, his parents didn't like him dedicating his career to NATO. They were against NATO. They didn't think NATO would promote peace. They thought NATO promotes war, and so you have all these very conflicting values and views, and I found that interesting. I really did. Also, that part of what I wanted also to show the people what kind of human beings are at the helm of NATO.
Yeah, because in the film we see Stoltenberg texting Trump, and there's always these shots of the corridors, and at the beginning also of the film, you see the rehearsal of the speech. Yeah. And there's actually quite a lot of that in the film. And I think this is just maybe a really nice metaphor of how the people in power, we see them off the news screen, the front face of them, like the role that they're playing. And then your film really reveals that other side.
Because I think that's words are very important to, especially Secretary General of NATO, because words, it's not that much he gets to decide because he is bound to the heads of state and government, the 32 presidents and prime ministers, and he has to have all of them on board before he gets to do something. So that's a very, very slow-moving political machine. But he gets to choose his wording sometimes, giving speeches, giving interviews. So words become very important because that's your tool. You don't have any other tools. You can't punish a country. You can't bargain with a country. So you only have the art of persuasion. So words are your tools, but it's also is where it can go horribly wrong if you use the wrong words on the big stage. So we have to be really, really careful. And also that's part of the world I want to take people into, that they sit and taste words like, experts taste wine. Yeah. And is this the right word? You have to be really, really, really precise. And then that's also the art of diplomacy. And that is also where you get to see some of their doubts and their dilemmas and where they're not sure, which I think is always really important in the story, that people have to doubt. Because if they don't doubt, they're not people. Then there are machines, or they're just pretending, because we don't
know what's the answer.
No.
And then, and you're also going very close to Stoltenberg, even to the personal level. We see him talking about his wife. We see him in his home, residence. How did you build this trust with him? And also, what's your, highlight about his personality? Maybe you discover something more that it's not showing up on the screen for general audience.
I think we could have gone also closer to him and focused more on his family if we wanted to. I have that in my material. We had to draw the line somewhere. I didn't want to make it too personal in that way, or let's say I didn't want to make it too private, because that would be deceiving because he is a full-time politician. He doesn't have much time for friends or family, so that would be fake. That train has left the station a long time ago. He didn't see his kids much growing up. That was a choice he had to make. And I know he was a good father to them, but he couldn't be as much present as he wanted to. And his wife lives in Oslo, and he can see her some weekends a month. And that's, of course, his decision. Nobody's forcing him. And that's also very important. There's no reason to feel sorry for him. He chose that life, and he has dedicated his life to the public in a way. And also I wanted to try to make this very, of course, it's very subtle, but I wanted it to be also the story of how a lot of people leave their family to go to war. So you leave your family and you go to war, and you don't know when or if you are returning. So that's why he speaks of her in the beginning. He thought he was going home. You're not. You have to stay another year, and then he gets to go home in the end. But that's how war works, So many parents and loved ones and children have to leave for the front, and there are no fairy tales while it's going on. You might the happy ending if you get to go home. So I kind of also wanted to show that there are also people in politics who sacrifice a lot for a greater good. And Stoltenberg is definitely one of them. You can agree or disagree with his political beliefs or what, but I think it's hard to criticize him for not putting in the hours and the sacrifice, because that's been a lot. He's been doing this for 20 years.
Mm-hmm. And you already mentioned about that, obviously there are people who might have a different perspective on NATO as an organization. And I think recently there's been an increase of anti-NATO protests globally. And what is your take about this polarization of society about values?
I think it's very good to have discussions about NATO. If we weren't having discussions about the military alliance, there would be something wrong. War, military alliance, defense. This should not be things that
we shouldn't be talking about.
No. These are really important matters. And I think. I totally understand that there are very strong emotions and feelings about weapons, about the military, and about our tax money funding defense, because obviously I think most people would always want that funding to go to education, healthcare, roads, and art, and everything that we cherish so much more. But times are also changing, and I think I usually say that I think NATO is in a way it's an insurance company for a lot of European, North American states, and insurance it always feels like a waste of money paying your insurance. It's always boring. But when your house is on fire, you're glad you had one, or it can be very expensive and painful not to have one. And I grew up, spent most of my time after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Cold War. So I've been lucky to live in and grow up in peace times. And I think in peace times, military alliances, that's a very far-fetched idea. Like, why do we need them? We have moved on. That's all behind us. Why would you go to war in today's world? It's so much better to have open borders, to trade, to everything. We've moved on also as humanity has moved on. It's so counterproductive to be at war. And then it changes, and it changes overnight. And I think that takes a lot, especially for people who have never seen anything else. It takes a lot to realize that can happen.
Yeah.
Because I think, especially in Western Europe, we have lived in this maybe naive idea that human evolution is linear, that we only evolve, that we only progress for the better, and we learn from our mistakes and we don't repeat them. Whereas I think in other parts of the world, maybe you look at time as more circular, and then you return to an era of violence again. Authoritarian powers, they will rise again. They will challenge if they feel weakness. If there is a vacuum of power, they will try to capture that.
Yeah,
and that I experience a lot going, in the eastern part of Europe. That is very much more present, as you know. It's because your parents, they have lived through it. They told you as a child. So even though you haven't experienced it yourself, you've been told those stories, and I think that's very humbling for me to realize that that there's a part of my own upbringing that there's a cutoff. Like my grandparents experienced war during the Second World War, but just toward the end, they were very small children then. But there is something that is not being passed on. Which is also a good thing. Like I think it's a good
the
thing.
Trauma
also
doesn't stop at some point.
But I, one of the editors, he's from Estonia, and having his perspective in the editing, I think is very important. And also traveling with Stoltenberg, going into these areas was very important for me to understand. And I remember being in Tallinn for their Independence Day, which is actually on the same day as the Invasion Day. And I remember the faces, because you can see the small children, they had their Estonian flags and they were celebrating, and it's grand day, but you can see their parents and grandparents, they have a very serious look, because they remember, but they also see ahead. Mm-hmm. And they know that the future of their child or grandchild,
is uncertain.
It's at play. And that concern is something that moves me deeply. And I think it's the privilege of growing up in a part of Europe where you don't feel like that. You should be really humble, because there are things about the world you don't understand. And that's also sometimes, this is a very difficult issue about talking about war and the military, but we tend often to discuss war as something you choose. Like there are two parties who choose to go to war against each other, but normally it's not. Normally it's a big power going to war at someone who really wants to avoid a war. If it's Taiwan, if it's Palestine, if it's Ukraine. And so you don't choose war. It comes to you. And how do we make a world? How do we create a world where big powers just don't always get what they want? Like if you have children, how do you raise a family where the strongest child doesn't always get to take the toys they want, or eat the candy of their siblings? It's the same thing. How do we create this world? I don't know. I don't have a perfect answer. I don't know if NATO is the best answer. NATO has been a very good answer for 75 years, but it's been a good answer for 1 billion of the world's population. What about the other 7 billion people who do not have the world's most powerful alliance? So there are some flaws, and of course in democracy there are a lot of flaws. It doesn't mean that it's broken, doesn't mean that we should give it up necessarily, but it means that we should just keep improving it by discussing it, by finding better solutions. That's by humanity. NATO is not made from nature. It's invented by people. And inventions, sometimes we improve them, and sometimes we come up with something better and we change. So if NATO doesn't work, it can't adapt to whatever, like you see the US now. Maybe are they pulling out? Will they stand by Article 5? Whatever. But if you can't adapt, then move on to something else, like we see the United Nations. Maybe the time of the United has passed because it's become so dysfunctional.
Yeah.
But we have to come up with something new. It's like we don't give up. We don't let down to die.
We just reconsider what's happening, what's the structure, and what is more relevant.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think me growing up in the eastern part of Europe, it's quite striking right now to see also the split in Europe, in the Western Europe and the Eastern Europe, and it's obvious that Eastern Europe is so much relying on NATO, and it's just striking my mind to see the anti-NATO, protests.
Yeah.
It's and especially like Europe is still so close to each other. We're not talking about the other side of the world, and it's just very strange.
I think for a lot of people who grew up in the Western European countries, did not understand the conditions for having the free societies that we love. What are the conditions to have freedom of speech, to have art, where people can be whoever they want to be, who love whoever they want to love, all those things. The conditions for a society like that.
And the cost.
And the cost to create that safe environment. And it's not forever, just be clear about that. That can change also. But that's why also I'd like. There are two reasons why I included in the film, where the foreign ministers, a lot of those East European countries who were who became members of NATO in the late 90s, beginning of 2000, what they say, what it actually meant to the country and the building of their nations. For the first time, they could take independent choices for the nation or what direction they wanted. It's because we needed to be reminded that they didn't become part of NATO to become stronger or more aggressive or become these powerful military nations. They did it so they could build the society that they wanted. And most of those countries have become what we say today very democratic, free countries. Developed in the direction they wanted. And maybe not the direction Putin wanted. But Putin doesn't get to run the Baltic states or Poland. And I think that's also easy to forget when you're born in Norway or the Netherlands or France, that at some point in your nation's history there were some conditions that allowed your society to evolve and progress into what it is today that you love and you want to protect. And you have to also be humble in a way and accept that other nations deserve the same. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you appreciate NATO because you take it a bit for granted, but other people rely on it. And it's very arrogant to just say that we don't need that because other nations, you can't just pull up the ladder. You need to take people with you. And also that's probably if you ask me personally, my biggest critique of NATO is what about the 7 billion other people who wants the same? What people living in other parts of the world? To me, there's a very great expression that says, no one's safe before everyone's safe. And in the long term, that's the goal. You have to include and involve people in how we progress as humanity. And the other side of why I wanted to include the scene with the foreign minister is also the fact that Ukraine is on the outside. And the feeling of being outside a family or outside a gang that is so great for everyone.
Outside the door of the house.
Yeah. And you see that they're all happy and they're all living in prosperity and freedom, and you're on the outside. And there's really no reason why you should be. The only reason why you're on the outside is because your old dominator doesn't want you to. So in a way, you still belong to them. You don't get to choose. You are not really a sovereign, independent nation because there is an old force still deciding over your future. And that force is now currently occupying your territory and killing your people. So,
yeah, and right now, while we're having this Q&A, your film is being screened to the people who work in ministry in the Netherlands. So it's a very specific audience. And I just wanted to maybe, make a remark that your film, I think, shown to the Western audience really can provide this understanding of what can, why NATO is actually very much needed and how, Ukraine and Eastern countries rely on it, NATO. So I think your film contributes to this potential change of people's mindsets. But I wanted to also ask, what other do you see the potential of the film and filmmaking in general for the change of people's mindsets?
My main ambition and my hope and dream is also that young people see that leadership can be interesting, engaging, and hopefully also see something they find hope or inspiration in, and that they don't give up on democracy, that they will have this black pill view on the world, that it's all broken and all the people in charge are corrupt and the system is rigged and it's not working for me and there's no use in giving my vote, and it doesn't matter who we elect because it's all going to be the same. That is really, really dangerous. And even though there are broken systems, there are bad leadership and many reasons to lose confidence in it. But I think, especially with the younger generations, they have to understand that their expectations and demands from the grown-ups is really important. That the leaders and the politicians, they need to feel the heat of the laser eyes from the young people in their back, and they have to know that they have, they need to go to their work every day and do their best and never give up, and try to fix the things that are broken. And I think, as I said before, you might disagree with Stoltenberg of what he's trying to achieve or his political views, but I think like seeing someone who really cares for something and fights for it and works for it, that is hopeful. That's the part of democracy as well. You have to accept that people are working for different political views. That's very important. And sometimes you also need to rule a bit, because you need a bit of change and dynamism. So showing that, I think, to young generations, that is important to me. Also, if I think, especially Western audience also understands that, we've probably been a bit. We try to get away as cheap as possible. I think that's a very human thing. When you're faced with a very uncomfortable situation, you think, what is the least I can do and get away with it as cheap as possible? And I think now and towards the end of Stoltenberg's tenure also, people realize that this is not going to be cheap. And also like peace and freedom might not come as cheap again as it has in the 90s and 2000s. It's going to cost a lot more. Not only our tax money, but also blood sacrifice. And that is a terrible situation that I think we all hope we would avoid, but we don't get to choose that. Like when someone else chooses violence, you're put in a very, very difficult situation. And I'm trying to be positive and optimistic, and I think it's been a rude awakening, but it's an awakening, and we can do something. We are really, really, really resourceful, and there are some really strong bonds. Like also Stoltenberg says in the film, like NATO is not only just like a military alliance; it's also an alliance where nations share their deepest secrets, like intelligence, and they tell everything that are really, really, really vulnerable. Like how many soldiers do you have? Where are your submarines? Where are your jets? Things that you would never reveal.
That don't come out to the media.
No,
right?
but they share it with each other, and that's also this solidarity. And you have nations doing that have been in war with each other for centuries. Lots of old enemies are now sharing their deepest secrets with each other, and that's a beautiful thing. I wish we shouldn't use too much energy and funding on defense and military, but I think that's we got to hold on to that. And these are big nations, powerful nations, and in a way we need to remind ourselves that that it is great things we can achieve. I find it astonishing that we are so terrified of a situation with Russia now. It's a nation with an economy the size of Italy, and like Donald Tusk said, why are 500 people looking to the nation of 300 people to solve a conflict with the nation of 150 people? It's a million people. So it's just an absurd situation that we had to just wake up and understand that we should have confidence that we can solve this, and hopefully with as few lives lost as possible.
There was this, the whole thing on the 28th of February in the White House with Trump and Zelensky, and it almost maybe like the whole month of February seemed a little bit like NATO is like falling apart.
Yeah.
It seemed like when I was hearing the conversations in the government of the United States that they are just debating who invaded who. It seemed a little bit too much. How did we ended up to this point?
Yeah.
And people who are right now living in Lithuania, even my friends, they started having panic attacks, especially about the fear of the war, and all of this like chaos that's I think have been happening recently. I think it's really in favor of Russia's politics.
And you'd be astonished at what kind of voices are also being heard in our countries. And yeah, of course, it's a freedom of speech. But I have one when a review of my film that was written by a very extreme leftish journalist or whatever you call him, where he was criticizing the film that why didn't I focus more on the Nazi movement in Ukraine? That this was actually a war to free Ukraine of Nazism. You know, that's a review in a newspaper.
Okay.
And of course, when you see that kind of rhetoric also almost like being repeated inside the Oval Office, that is very dangerous. That is very dangerous. And I think that's also why a lot of us were shocked of what was being said, because when you question like some really, really important facts that we should all agree upon, and when you cannot agree on the most basic facts, then you have you're going to have a lot of problem with talking to each other, and you will never find any solutions, or because you see the world, I see the world as red, and you see it as blue. I see it as flat, and you're seeing it as a circle. So where do you even begin? And when you don't have the same foundation, and also like, what are the conditions for a valid argument? You know, we have so what makes a valid argument, and we cannot even agree on that. So I get to choose my reality, choose my facts, choose my truth. I also get to choose what makes a valid argument. Then you can't really discuss, and when you can't discuss, you're not, you're living in echo chambers. And so that was, I think, that was shocking. But I talked to a lot of the people who were present also when NATO came in, and they said that they've been able to, I think, save a lot of that situation afterwards. So it's in a better state now, I think, than what it was at that point.
I mean, you touched a little bit about the reception of it in Copenhagen, but what did Stoltenberg? Of course, he saw the film before it came out, right? He
saw a rough cut.
Yeah.
Or, it wasn't rough, but it was not a finished film.
What was his take on it?
He's not a cultural guy. You can see that also in the film. His closest cultural reference is Sopranos that aired, 25 years ago. So he doesn't watch a lot of film or series or so. I think, and he's a history nerd. So I think if he got to choose, he would have liked a very archival film about NATO and the history of Europe and everything with experts and stuff like that. I think that's also why he expected. But he understood that we made something completely different, and he liked it. I think he feels that it's a bit too close for his taste. Mm-hmm. But he understands that it has importance. His wife, she loved it.
Of course.
So I saw it together with her. So I was sitting in her living room between them.
Oh, really? You were in the living room with both of them?
Yes, in his house in Oslo. And then I connected my laptop to their screen, and then we sat in the living room and watched it. It was quite intense. But she loved it, and he was, I think, became a lot more calmer when he realized that she really liked it. And then, of course, we had the screening in Copenhagen, and he was a bit overwhelmed. I know that it was a bit too much, and he feels a bit embarrassed, because I think I also it's the aspect I share with him, because for him and for me, he got to go home to his wife and a life in Oslo. He got his happy ending. I get to make a film that has been finished, and I get to travel the world with it, and a lot of people are saying good things about it. But there are people in the trenches, and they've been living in the trenches for a whole winter in minus 20 degrees, and they're not coming home. So in a way, you also have to be very aware that even though your story is ended, your film is through, the reality,
it hasn't changed. We're still facing war.
Yeah. And so in a way, you have to be proud of what you've done, but we're not there, so we can't celebrate. And I think for him also, it's in his way, he didn't end the war. He didn't save the world. So please keep the applause down, because we need to focus everything on the situation in Ukraine. And I also feel the same. I feel some ambivalence towards celebrating a film and having applause and having premiere, and there are parties and people share with glasses, and the reality is that there is nothing to celebrate. Sorry, it is. But it doesn't mean that you have to also be able to celebrate small moments. And there was a moment after one of the screenings in Copenhagen. I had two young girls in the beginning of their 20s who stayed after the screening. They were from Ukraine. They had lived in Copenhagen since the invasion. And we talked about that. And I asked them that we are going to have our big premiere in Oslo next week. How do you feel about it? Because I have mixed emotions about having a big celebration, and they said that they understood my feelings, that they thought that we should be able to be proud of what we've done and celebrate. But they also told me that they felt the same because she had for 3 years wished she could do her nails, a manicure. But she's a young girl. She wants to look good and feel good about herself. But she has not been able to do that because she feels so bad for the people left in Ukraine. And that she has to spend all her money sending to Ukraine. And this survivor's guilt, that it impacted me hugely because she's a young girl. She should have every right to also have a party, on a weekend or... and I think that's also an aspect that we have to remind ourselves about, that we need also to celebrate the small wins and the small progress and to keep sanity. And there is so much bad and depressing things happening in the world. But we need to also have some hope and to focus on the light as well. And I think like a lot of the news business is focused on conflict, of course, and on criticism and fighting the darkness. But when you only read the news, you could be deceived into thinking that there's only darkness out there. But I also think we need to make some stories where you actually cheer for the light, understand that there is the opposite, and we cannot only fight the darkness. We need also to cheer and help the light, and that's where I think documentary films are really important, because you can tell stories, and stories have some morale in it, and it can give you a very different view to the world, and to me also that's a way of understanding life and the world. What makes a good story? What makes a good story? A good story has to have a good villain. Like the best Bond films are the one that has a good villain, right?
Yeah.
So villains are important in your life. You need to have someone who's fighting you. Doesn't need to be a person. It can be something inside yourself, or it can be conditions that you grew up under, or nature, or whatever. You have something that you need to conquer. And a good story, you need resistance. You need to struggle. If there's not a real struggle, it's not an engaging story. So the struggles in your life is what makes the story of your life interesting. It actually increases the quality of your life. It doesn't feel like it in the moment, because in the moment you hate that struggle. But if you look back at it,
when you overcome it,
you see that is what made me interesting. That is what made me special. And I think that's also part where your very important stages of a story, of a film, like the call to action. Maybe this is the call to action for Europe. This is what we needed. We needed a Trump in the White House. We needed a Putin with the invasion plans. That's the call to action. And then you have the mid of a film, where we often call a near death moment, or a kiss of death, or when it like all hope is lost. That's also a very important part of a film. Maybe that's where we are now. I don't know. But in storytelling, villains, struggle, and near-death moments, that's the most important part of a story. So we need it. But it's actually where we get to show our strengths. It's get to show who we are. It's where the hero or the main character or a society gets to rise up. And that's what shapes us in a way. So I tend to see it like that. So we are in very interesting part of the European history at the moment.
Yeah, I think we're living in the history textbook.
Yeah.
Like moments of that, that future generations will be learning at school. And I think when I watched the film in February, I really thought that that's so much, maybe even more relevant than what, the events you're depicting in the film. And yeah, there's going to be NATO summit in the Hague this June. The film, I've heard that the film's going to be screened there too.
Yeah, I hope so.
So I think it's a really good way to reflect on the past events, but also on the present. Thank you so much for the conversation. It was really inspiring.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. I hope you found Tommy Gulliksen's thoughts insightful and hopeful. Facing War premiered 6 days prior to our conversation and was an opening film of CPH Docs in Copenhagen. It received Best Documentary Award at Movies That Matter, making this film eligible to compete for Academy Award for Best Documentary. For everyone who will encounter an opportunity to watch the film, I would highly recommend it. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you soon.
The episode you just heard was produced by Nojus Setkauskas, our fellow at the Perspectives Journalism Initiative. The episode was recorded and edited by Nojus himself and was mixed by Kata Bitoft. The co-editors were Austea Puraite, Polina Tolpygina, and me, Karolis Vyšniauskas. The music you are hearing is composed by Martynas Gailius. Perspectives is an international newsroom bringing together journalists from Czech Republic, Germany, Slovakia, Poland, Hungary, Lithuania, Estonia, and Ukraine. It's co-financed by the European Union, but each newsroom has its own editorial control. NARA is a collective of journalists. We are based in Lithuania, Vilnius, and in our work we tackle questions that we find interesting and relevant for today's societies. Anything from political to cultural to social issues. We try to talk with people and get a better sense of what is going on. We work as a non-profit, so any kind of support is always welcome. And the best way to do that is go to our website, nara.lt/support, and you just find the best way that suits you. Once again, nara.lt/support. Thank you all who are considering to do that. My name is Karolis Vyšniauskas. I am the editor of NARA Podcast. Your feedback is always welcome at karolis@nara.lt. Thank you, and talk to you soon.